Welcome to Luxury Stories 24/7, where every story is full of emotions, lessons, and unforgettable moments. Get ready for a journey of love, betrayal, and healing. Let the story begin. Grace heaved a weary sigh as she pushed open the flimsy wooden door of their one-room home in Ayobo. The evening air was thick and humid, clinging to her skin after another exhausting day. In the gloom of the single kerosene lamp, she could make out her husband, James, seated on a threadbare mat, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Their two children, Emma and David, lay curled together on the mat, fast asleep. Grace's heart clenched at the sight of them. They looked like little angels even in this hellish place they called home, a tiny leaky shack with cracked walls and a zinc roof that rattled whenever the wind blew. A sour smell of stagnant water wafted in. Just outside, a black gutter brimmed with refuse and breeding mosquitoes. Grace stepped carefully over a puddle where the roof leaked, careful not to wake the children. Her feet ached from hours of scrubbing floors on hands and knees. She set down her plastic bucket of cleaning supplies and quietly lowered herself to the mat. James looked up at her, his eyes dull with despair. "You're back," he said softly. In the dim light, Grace could see the worry lines etched deeply into his forehead. He had tried to find work that day as usual, likely pushing a wheelbarrow at the market or doing odd jobs for pennies. Yet he came home empty-handed again. Grace managed a faint smile. "Yes, I'm back." Her voice was hoarse and tired. She pulled off the cheap, worn-out shoes, pinching her feet, and stretched her toes. Every muscle in her body protested. She had spent the day cleaning offices in Ikeja, leaving before dawn and returning long after dusk for wages that barely bought them a loaf of bread. As she massaged her sore hands, Grace's frustration bubbled over. "We can't keep living like this," she whispered, anger and tears welling up together. She glanced at Emma and David, 5 and 8 years old, their thin faces smudged with dirt even in sleep. That sight twisted something inside her. They deserved so much more than hunger and mosquito bites. Grace fought back tears, thinking of how Emma had cried from stomach pains last night because all they had for dinner was a watery cornmeal paste. James rubbed her back gently. "I know," he murmured, though his voice was flat. This was an old conversation between them, the hopeless refrain of what could they do. They had prayed and fasted, beseeched God at church for a miracle, yet heaven remained silent. Every night Grace lit a small candle and prayed until her knees were sore, but each morning she woke still in this nightmare. Tonight something in Grace snapped. "Prayer isn't putting food on the table, James," she said bitterly, louder than she intended. Her son David stirred at her raised voice but did not wake. Grace lowered her tone, but the intensity remained. "I'm tired. I'm so tired of watching our children suffer." Her fingers dug into her palms as she tried to contain the anger and desperation. "If God won't help us, maybe something else will." James frowned, blinking in confusion. "What do you mean, Grace?" She hesitated. The thought that had been lurking in the dark corners of her mind now pushed forward boldly. Rumors often swept through the slum alleys of Ayobo, rumors of people who found wealth through other means, dark means. Normally, Grace shuddered at such stories, dismissing them as cautionary tales or sinful paths. But tonight, in the silent company of hunger and despair, those forbidden ideas glowed temptingly, like embers in the ashes of her faith. "Have you ever heard of people doing things to get money? Spiritual things?" she asked quietly, eyes fixed on a crack in the concrete floor. James stiffened. "Grace, no, you can't be thinking that." His voice held a warning but also a trace of fear. They both knew what she was alluding to. The whispers about money rituals, pacts with dark forces, the kind of sin that could doom one's soul. People gossiped about a man in the next community who suddenly went from rags to riches. Tongues wagged that he must have used someone for money, perhaps a relative or even his own child. Such stories usually ended badly, they knew. Or at least they'd been taught to believe so in church. Grace closed her eyes. A single tear escaped and rolled down her dusty cheek. I don't want to think about it, James. But what choice do we have? We can't even feed Emma and David properly. I scrub floors until my bones feel like they'll break, and it's still not enough. Her voice cracked. I watched Mrs. Johnson throw away half a plate of rice today that I cooked for her, threw it away like garbage while our children... She couldn't finish, choking on her words. James pulled her into a gentle embrace as silent tears streamed down her face. He had no words of comfort. They both knew their situation was dire. Instead, he rocked her slowly. The only sounds were the distant honking of a bus on the main road and the buzz of insects outside. Finally, James spoke, voice trembling. Grace, promise me you won't do anything foolish. Those people who chase quick wealth through rituals, they pay a heavy price. He looked over at the kids again to emphasize his point. I heard that man in the next community is dying of madness now, muttering to himself all day. Money that costs you your soul, what good is it? Grace knew he was right, in a way. But as she stared at her children, a fierce resolve hardened in her chest. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. I don't know, she said quietly, but I can't watch them starve, James. I can't. They fell into a heavy silence, each left with their own thoughts dark and desperate. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The rainy season was coming soon, which meant their leaky roof would pour water onto them at night. Grace bit her lip, dread coiling in her stomach. How would they survive the next downpour? That night, sleep eluded her. She lay listening to the soft breathing of Emma and David, and the occasional restless turn of James beside her. At some point in the early morning, just before the roosters of Ayobo crowed at dawn, Grace made up her mind. If an opportunity, any opportunity, presented itself to change their fortunes, she would take it, no matter the cost. It was late afternoon, and Grace had just finished her cleaning shift at an upscale salon in town. The heat of the day was waning as she trudged toward the bus stop. Her worn slippers slapped against the dusty ground. The street was busy with hawkers and workers returning home, yet Grace felt utterly alone, adrift in her worries about the unpaid rent and Emma's persistent cough that needed medicine. "Hello, my dear," came a voice from behind her. Grace turned to see a woman standing by the entrance of a narrow alley between two shops. She was small and slight, draped in a faded Ankara-patterned shawl despite the warmth. On her head was tied a black scarf, and in her hand she gripped a wooden walking stick. Her face was mysterious. She looked old, yet her eyes were strangely bright and youthful. Grace wouldn't have paid her much mind except those eyes were fixed directly on her. Grace realized she'd stopped walking. "Good evening, Ma," she replied politely, using the respectful term for an older woman. The woman smiled, revealing teeth that were impossibly white. "You look troubled, my child. Forgive my boldness, but I could feel the burden on you as you passed by." Grace's heart skipped. It was true she had heavy thoughts, but how could a stranger sense it? Probably just a guess. Everyone here had troubles. She forced a tiny smile, trying to brush it off. "I'm fine, Ma. Just tired from work." The woman stepped closer, the beaded necklaces around her neck clinking softly. Her voice lowered, intimate and soothing. "Sometimes life is more than just being tired. I see pain in your face. And something else. A hunger." She paused, and Grace found herself unable to break away from the woman's piercing gaze. "You have children, don't you?" Grace blinked in surprise. She could not recall seeing this woman before, yet the question felt probing, almost invasive. Still, She nodded. Yes, 2. The woman tisk-tisked sympathetically. It is written in your eyes, you know. A good mother will worry when her children suffer. She cocked her head. Are they suffering, my dear? Grace's throat tightened. A stranger's kindness, or what seemed like kindness, threatened to unravel her composure. She swallowed hard. We have fallen on hard times, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. At this, the old woman's smile broadened in a way that made Grace uneasy. Hard times? Yes, I know a thing or two about that. Lagos can be cruel to those with gentle hearts. She leaned on her walking stick, eyes glinting. But sometimes fortune favors the bold, and help can come from places you don't expect. Grace felt a chill despite the warm evening. Something about the woman's last sentence felt loaded, as if it meant more than it said. What kind of help? Grace asked carefully. The woman looked around conspiratorially. People passed by them on the busy road, paying no attention to the pair by the alley. Let's just say, the woman murmured, that I know ways, old ways, to turn your situation around, to give you the life you desire, the life you and your family deserve. Grace's heart thudded. Here it was, the thing she had secretly yearned for in sleepless nights. Yet confronted with it, she hesitated. I don't understand, she lied. Her mouth suddenly felt dry. The woman chuckled softly, a sound that was both comforting and eerie. Child, you do understand. You are like a drowning woman clutching at a straw, yes? I am offering you something solid to hold on to. She extended a bony hand and touched Grace's arm lightly. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through Grace, as if the old woman radiated some unseen energy. I have helped others, people who were in hopeless situations like yours. Now they live in fine houses, drive big cars, eat the best food, all their sorrows forgotten. Images flashed through Grace's mind unbidden. Her children in nice clothes, rosy-cheeked and laughing. Herself in a fine car instead of a crowded bus. James standing proud in a suit rather than slinking home in shame. A life of plenty, a life of ease. A life unimaginably distant from Ayobo's misery. It was everything she longed for. Temptation tugged at her, strong and magnetic. But at what cost? Grace whispered. Her voice shook. She had to ask, even as dread coiled in her stomach. Nothing came free, especially not something like this. The woman's dark eyes glittered. You already know the answer, my dear. The cost is significant. A small sacrifice for a great reward. She paused, then added softly, or perhaps not so small. It's the sacrifice of what you love the most. A cold wave washed over Grace. In the fading light, the woman's face seemed to shift, the shadows accentuating hollows and making her eyes appear sunken and ancient. Grace took a half-step back instinctively. I can't, she stammered, though inside her a voice asked, Can't you? The woman's hand tightened, surprisingly strong on Grace's arm, preventing her retreat. Think about it, she said, almost in a purr. What future do your little ones have now? Starvation, sickness, an early grave in the slums, perhaps. Is that what a loving mother wants? Grace felt the blood drain from her face. How dare this stranger speak of her children dying? She wanted to pull away, to run, but her limbs felt leaden because the woman was also voicing Grace's own worst fears. Emma had grown so thin. David was already 8 and not in school because they couldn't afford it. He spent days picking scrap metal to sell. If nothing changed, was the woman wrong? Was Grace fighting so hard for her children only to see them perish slowly from poverty's cruel grip? No, Grace croaked. I don't want that. Of course not. The woman's tone was gentle now, almost sweet, as she leaned in. Grace could smell her breath, strangely fragrant, like a mix of bitter cola and something herbal. A mother wants to save her children. Sometimes. Her voice dropped to a whisper. The only way to save them is to set their spirits free from this suffering and use their innocent blessing to bring prosperity. Their sacrifice would not be an end, but a doorway, for all of you. Grace's mind swam. She understood the woman's proposition clearly now, yet it felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Her heart pounded in her chest. You want me to... She couldn't say the words. The old woman finished the thought calmly. I want you to consider giving them a better life beyond this world, so that you and your husband might have a better life in this world. Her eyes bored into Grace's. Such pure sacrifice carries great power. Grace began to tremble from head to toe. This was beyond taboo, beyond evil. This was heresy against everything she believed, everything she loved, her children, her babies. The very idea made her soul scream in protest. And yet, her eyes burned with fresh tears. Hadn't she already failed as a mother? She couldn't provide for them, couldn't protect them from hunger and misery. Each day she watched them wither, and her love alone was not enough to feed them or secure their future. I'm not a killer, Grace whispered, voice broken. The woman inclined her head, a shadow of impatience crossing her features. My dear, sometimes we must do painful things for a greater good. After all, their spirits will live on. It's just their flesh that ties them to suffering here. She released Grace's arm and stepped back slightly, letting her words sink in. But I am not forcing you. I am only offering a path. Grace realized she had backed up to the wall of the alley. She felt cornered by more than physical space, cornered by fate. I should go, she said weakly, pushing off the wall. The woman nodded, surprisingly gracious. Yes, go. You should think about it. Talk to your husband, perhaps. If you decide that poverty and slow death is preferable for your family, that is your choice. Grace winced at the blunt words. She turned to leave, unsteady on her feet. The street was still bustling beyond the alley's mouth. Normal life continued out there, vendors calling their wares, an Okada motorcycle revving past with a passenger, two women laughing as they balanced baskets on their heads. Grace stepped into that world again, breathing fast as if she'd surfaced from deep water. Was she really considering what had been suggested? No, I can't. I won't, she told herself. Yet images of money and food and fine houses danced seductively in her mind, refusing to be pushed away. Behind her, the old woman's voice came one last time, calm and certain. If you decide you want my help, come to the old baobab tree by the abandoned well on the edge of Ayobo at midnight, on the next new moon. Grace stopped in her tracks, her back still to the woman. The next new moon, that was only 3 days away, she realized. A strange tingling spread through her body, a mix of dread and anticipation. She didn't respond or turn around. After a moment, she only nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and then forced herself to walk on. All the way home on the bus, her mind raced. She stared blindly out the window at the Lagos twilight, the city lights flickering to life as darkness fell. People crammed in the Molu bus with her were sweating and swaying with the potholes, some dozing after a long day's work. She was usually among them, exhausted into numbness. But now Grace felt painfully awake. Is this a sign, she wondered? An answer to my prayers, twisted though it may be? By the time she reached Ayobo and trudged down the muddy path to their shack, she still hadn't made up her mind. Or perhaps she had, deep down, but couldn't admit it to herself. One thing was certain. She had to tell James. She couldn't carry this alone. Inside the dark hut, James looked up in relief as she entered. He always worried for her safety in the city. The children were awake, sitting on the floor around a small lantern, playing a clapping game to entertain themselves. There was no food cooking, nothing to cook. James had managed only a few bananas he got at the market. He offered one to Grace. She took it, her stomach growling at the sight of real food, but the heaviness in her chest made it hard to swallow when she bit into it. The sweet taste turned to ash in her mouth as she looked at her children's innocent faces. After the kids finally drifted to sleep that night, Grace mustered her courage. "James, I need to tell you something," she began in a trembling voice. In the near darkness, James shifted to face her. The moonlight through their window slats highlighted his concerned expression. "What is it?" Grace took a deep breath and quietly recounted her encounter with the strange old woman. With each detail, the woman's knowing eyes, her offer of help, and the horrifying price, James's face went from curious to shocked, then to a mask of disbelief and anger. When she finished, he stood up abruptly, almost hitting his head on the low ceiling. "Are you out of your mind, Grace?" he hissed, keeping his voice low so as not to wake the children. Despite the restraint, fury and fear radiated off him. How could you even listen to such a person? Sacrifice our children, our own blood? What kind of mother are you to even entertain this? Grace flinched at his words as if slapped. What kind of mother watches her children starve? She shot back, tears streaming. What kind of father sits helpless while his family suffers? James's jaw tightened as if she had struck him. "Don't you dare, Grace," he warned, voice shaking. "I love our kids more than anything. I'd rather die than harm a hair on their heads." "And do you think I wouldn't?" Grace sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "James, I'm dying inside every day we live like this. You think it's easy for me to even repeat what that woman said?" He fell silent, breathing hard. Grace lowered her hands, revealing eyes that were red and pleading. "But maybe she's right," Grace said softly. "What future do Emma and David have here? Look at them, James. Thin, always sick, no chance to go to school. If their innocent spirits can go to heaven instead, and we can have a chance to live, to really live." Her voice faltered. The logic sounded twisted and grotesque out loud, but in her desperation she clung to it. James stared at her in horror. "You don't know that they'd go to heaven if we do something so evil," he whispered. He ran a hand over his shaved head in agitation. "This is wrong, Grace. It's beyond wrong. It's murder. It's damnation." Grace was silent, trembling. She knew it was murder. The word sickened her. She felt she might vomit even imagining it. But she also imagined her children lying in small coffins after dying of cholera from the dirty water, or from malnutrition next year. Was that any less of a death sentence? At least in the woman's promise, their suffering would end swiftly. "I'm afraid," she admitted in a broken whisper. "But I'm also afraid of doing nothing. How long before we lose them anyway, James? One illness, one accident because we can't afford proper shelter or care." James sat back down slowly, his legs no longer steady. He looked helplessly at the sleeping shapes of Emma and David. The little girl had one arm thrown around her brother. The sight nearly undid him. Tears glistened in his eyes now. "We can't. We just can't," he said, but it sounded as if he were trying to convince himself as much as her. Grace placed a hand on his arm gently. "The new moon is in 3 days. She said to meet at the old baobab by the abandoned well at midnight. If we decide not to, no one will know. But if we don't go, this chance is gone forever." Her voice became very quiet, almost the hush of a conspirator. "James, would it be so bad to just hear her out? To see what's involved? We don't have to do anything if we can't go through with it." James looked at his wife with disbelief. Her face was drawn, eyes hollow with exhaustion and dread. Yet behind it he saw a glimmer of wild hope, a hope he hadn't seen in her for a long time. It frightened him.